Good afternoon. It's Dr. Bernardo, and it's week 2 of our HRM course. And what I like to do is pretty much every week, maybe not every week, but certainly most weeks, I'll be posting a video introducing the content, a la what the syllabus dictates, and clarifying things that I think need to be clarified. I'll also do a brief commentary about our upcoming chapters that you will have been expected to have read, and a clarification of discussion questions if I think that it's necessary. And I do think that it's partially necessary for the next expectation, actually for the remaining expectations in many senses. So going with that, I was going to bring up the syllabus to show you what's on, because I will do that. Give me a second. And I'll need more than a second. Bear with me. There we go. Something kind of clumsy about Zoom, and I kind of pride myself on being relatively experienced with this, but nonetheless, I do run into issues like I'm running into right now. Like, for example, where is the share button? This is not good. Let's see if there we go. Okay, I just wanted to show you the week 2 expectation, and let's march. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4. It's kind of lost in that column. Goals for the week. One would be enable you to discuss what forces are out there to understand what influences the workplace. And we're going to talk about that from a couple of different dimensions across the semester. So I'll introduce that today. B is to discuss key roles for training professionals. And I'm seeing that emerge quite clearly from how you perceive your roles as HRM people. And so, well, I'll just kind of try to distinguish that much more carefully along the way. C, which is the one that you can't maybe necessarily see so well, is to identify reasons for using subject matter experts and internal trainers. And we're talking about, really, as we said several times already, and that you almost unanimously alluded to in your discussion questions, is the need to grow your people so that they meet their own needs. That would be personal mastery, a la Senge and the 5 disciplines, and continue along those same lines to meet the needs and the values and the visions of how we perceive the shared vision to be in their organization as well. So that's a key piece, and how we recognize the need to go out and get strangers from a strange land, sometimes to bring in an expert, and my preference, and probably most of your preferences too, would be to train internal people. Someone mentioned cross-training, internal people who can, first of all, be recognized for their expertise and valued for that, and held up as exemplars for other people to use as well. But there are some times when you need to bring in a Bernardo, not that I'm an expert on all these things all the time, or Dr. XYZ or Mrs. ABC or so forth, to come in and be a stranger, be a prophet from another land, to use an old phrase. So I don't know how hard we have to hit that. I think you kind of get that already, but we will be talking about that more specifically when we get our fingernails deep into our fingers deep into the apple pie that's coming up, in terms of really beginning to create needs assessment processes, continuous needs assessment processes as well. The last one, goal E, I literally added this morning because I recognize the need to plant the acorn for this now. And as you'll begin to see very quickly, if you don't already, that I really believe in continuing overlapping processes and concepts in small chunks until they become, until the tipping point arrives someplace where the critical mass becomes so strong that it just becomes part of who you are in terms of your HRM premises. So that premise of futuring, and I did allude to that with a couple of people in their discussion responses about an hour ago, is a concept that I take to heart very, very strongly and believe in very much. And I want you to drink some of that. I want you to drink some of that Kool-Aid as well. Okay, I'm going to cut that off in a minute as soon as I can find my phone. I'm trying to cut it off. I'm sorry. That was my daughter. I apologize for that. Okie doke, where are we? Start again, Richard. All right, so the content associated with that. I apologize. I'm pretty good with the Apple things, but sometimes if I can't get the phone out of my pocket fast enough, we run into things like that. And hopefully my daughter doesn't need me for an emergency. All right, start again, Richard. Third time. I kind of got into chapters 1 and 2 a bit in the previous class, the introductory class, and I went into it in the office hours. Now I know I had to say some things. A couple of things to talk to. Number one, I just made an announcement formally on Blackboard to remind you that office hours, which last week, this past Tuesday, from this point on will be on Mondays at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I think I said 5 p.m. originally, but I'm going to move that to 6. And again, know that it's optional. It is not required. You can get on with a question and jump off. You can stay with me all the time and ask me to explain something. Knowing me, I'll talk about most anything, about any topic that you bring up, and try to elaborate on things that we may have glossed over in the class in one form or another. So that's an optional hour. I will record it if I think what I'm recording is not a personal issue, but a class-wide issue. I'll record it and post it, and you can look at it at your leisure. I do encourage you to get on every now and then. I'd like to meet everybody, quite frankly, as well. It's kind of important to me. So that's where we are with that. That's the first piece. The second piece is that discussion question. You see the discussion question here. It says, connect your understanding of systems disciplines and futuring to principles of exemplary human resource leadership through a PMI lens. Now, there's 2 or 3 things going on there. When you first look at that question, you may think, oh, well, he's just repeating the question from the first week, which, by the way, everyone did a spectacular job on. I was most impressed with the level of the responses and the quality of the responses and the complexity of the responses that you gave me and that you gave each other. And I think my wife is trying to get a hold of me. What's up? What?
They wanted to talk to you.
All right, tell me about an hour. I'll call him back.
Grandpa's gonna call you back.
Okay. That was my grandson, so I really need to talk to my grandson, but after we're finished. All right, so I'm trying to remember what I said, but it was essentially I don't remember what I was saying. It'll come to me in the middle of the next sentence. So at any rate, the discussion question. You folks did a very nice job with that. I really appreciate the quality of the responses and the fact that you responded to each other so nicely as well. That was great. But no, this question is a little bit different. If you look a little more closely, you'll see two additions to the expectation of the question. First expectation is futuring. There's a PowerPoint in the documents section that you can look to. I'm going to go use that PowerPoint now to go through, but it's also posted up in Blackboard for you to review at your leisure, so that you can understand it that much better. It is a concept that, as I said a few minutes ago, I embrace very much. And on the one hand, it's very, very obvious. My usual example I give is that just around now, maybe a little later in the season, squirrels future. That is to say, squirrels bury acorns so that the acorns will be someday harvested by the squirrels to get more acorns. That's futuring. When farmers rotate their crops or enrich the soil for the next year's planting, they're futuring. When you put money in a 401, you're futuring. That is to say, you're forecasting what you think your needs are going to be, and then what you're trying to do is make decisions now to more nearly meet what I call the preferred future. And the preferred future, I'll come back to this more readily in a moment, it is what it sounds like, what you want. You can call it vision if you want. I think it's deeper than that, though, because it's also connected to purpose. And you can also say, well, vision is connected to purpose, but sometimes vision gets blurred by purpose, or purpose gets blurred by vision, unless it's the vision is developed very effectively, as some of you mentioned in your discussion questions, by getting everyone to contribute and feel collectively engaged with the development of that vision and mission. So futuring is part of that, but futuring is also more complex than that. And I'll be introducing that premise to you in a few minutes so that you can use that to answer that question. The other piece is something called PMI. It's right down at the bottom of the blue highlight there. And PMI is about, I can get into a big long conversation about this, but the shortest way to describe it is that the person who created this strategy for De Bono calls it plus minus interesting. Plus minus interesting. So I may have even mentioned this in the first video. I think maybe I did. But essentially what we're talking about is when you're considering an issue, what's the pluses about it? The things that you think are good, that you think have great value, obvious enough. And its opposite is minuses. What are the yes buts that you say? Now, the yes buts don't have to be cruel and mean and critical, but there are all ways to point out things that you think maybe a minus in an issue that somebody points out. And the one that interests me the most personally is the I. And in my mind, the I stands for two things: interests and intriguing. So if someone says something, writes something that in any of the discussion or conversations that you think is intriguing or interesting, or something you'd like to know more about, please comment on that. Just say, well, I really need to know more about this. What is it that you know? Where can we go to find out more about this? Dr. B, what do you think about this as well? We're going to use that system in lots of places along the way throughout the rest of the semester, but I would like to see you using it in your discussion responses, starting with this way, PMI. So there's two premises that are added to the original one. The whole expectation was to connect your understanding of systems disciplines with futuring, with the principles of exemplary leadership, in your cases, through a PMI lens. Okay? So I've explained PMI, I've explained a little bit about futuring, and with that, I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to move over to a PowerPoint that, again, you can view it as when you feel a need to view it, because it's a supplement to the expectation that you're going to have read at least the first 3 chapters by now. And I think that's a legitimate expectation. And I hope that you're finding the book to be of the same value that I find it to be, because I think it pretty highly of it. So I'm going to go with the low-hanging fruit for a minute. Bring up a brief PowerPoint that kind of captures what I think are the salient points of the first 3 chapters. Understanding that you really, at this point, expected to read the first 2, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. I may stop before I get to chapter 3 if I think that I'm overloading you, which I have a habit of doing to people. So now I'm going to share this PowerPoint. Am I? And here we go. I mentioned the premise of lesson agendas. I haven't posted a lesson agenda yet, but I will post a lesson agenda probably tomorrow. And you'll always see that identified in documents in the Blackboard. And I think I've said several times, and I'll repeat myself more times about the same piece. You can't just look at this once a week. You can't just look at this on Saturdays. You need to look at this, but I'm posting throughout the week. I have a big habit of throwing documents up and videos and so forth when I find the time to do that. And if you were to wait till Saturday to do that, you would have a very long Saturday with me. So I would really recommend that you look at the postings in the Blackboard at least 2 or 3 times a week. Okay. All right. So these are the key points to master. We've gone over these already as far as the objectives for some of this. I want to point out, as I did last week, the verbs. And there's a reason why I'm doing that. Recognize, identify, differentiate, identify, draw the relationship, recognize, distinguish, recognize, consider, recognize, evaluate, recognize, perform, evaluate. There's ranges of verbs there. When you see something like recognize, a verb like that, or identify, that's what we call a lower order thinking skill. Not hard to say, oh, yes, that's a tree out there. I identify that as a tree. Oh, yes, it's a maple tree. I identified it that much more. That's a low-level, higher order thinking skill. I'm sorry, it's a low-level thinking skill. It's not a higher order thinking skill. When you see verbs like differentiate, or draw the relationship, or distinguish, or consider, or evaluate, now you're at the top of the pyramid. And I use that phrase on purpose for a later lesson. Now you're talking about higher order thinking skills. Thinking skills that you aren't able to perform unless you have some of those lower order thinking skills in place. So you can see the author identifies, and I color coded them just to have them stand out. The author identifies several goals or intentions for each of the chapters, and you should take those to heart. They're well drawn and put together well. The diagrams the author uses are terrific. Certain senses pay more attention to the diagrams than to the text. That's a dangerous thing for a professor to say, but I think that they're very well done. And they say if you can make sense of the diagram, then maybe you don't have to read what that section is about, or maybe you need to read the section to reinforce it. So I'm not going to read all these to you. I would say that the yellow and the green are the chapters 1 and 2, and that the blue is 3. So maybe we won't get to 3 today. Again, because I don't want to overload you. In chapter 1, when we talked about this, here's some of the goals that they talked about. And I think I cherry-picked some of these. I won't read them back to you so much as, again, to recognize what they're about. What are the factors and variables that you need to consider? And you spoke beautifully to that in your discussion questions. More importantly, recognize the relationships between your obligation as the HR person to create the kind of training and development spirals, where I like to use a lot, to have these things come together and synergize to make something bigger than the size than the sum of its parts, which would then require that you identify principles of training and design. Again, up the road, we're not going to do all that in one chapter or not really for a couple of weeks yet. In order for you to be able to differentiate kind of types of training, what I'm doing right now is what I even just look at my face on this Zoom. I'm just doing talking heads. This is the worst way to teach anybody anything. The best thing about talking heads is what? Answer it between your ears before I tell you what the answer is. What's the best thing about talking head teaching? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's quick. The professor talks, you listen, you write it down if you think you need to do it. That's quick learning, not great efficient learning. Efficient learning is doing and applying. And we will get into that heavily as the semester begins to become more complex. So that's chapter one in terms of, in terms of some of the issues associated with that. So as you read chapter one, or if you haven't read chapter one, you should be doing that pretty carefully. We'll talk more about that because really we're talking about the world out there. And the world out there, if you haven't been paying attention to in the past 3 years, you either would have been very ill, or you've seen other people who have been very ill or worse. You would wonder why your gas tank prices for a long time were way up and why you're spending a whole heck of a lot more for a slice of pizza. If you're worried about what's happening in the world out there, and let's say the Ukraine, you would know that even though it seems so far away, it's absolutely influencing our economy and our politics and how we look at things. And to some extent, somewhere along the line, you need to think about how these things out there really speak to. I apologize. I'm not sure why the phone is ringing so much today. So that you need to consider how the world out there is not a bubble. You're not sitting in a bubble creating crackerjack someplace. There's very few businesses or any that I can think of that are not affected by the world out there. So the rhetorical question is, how could you think beyond? How could you think about the training needs you have without considering that? Many of you mentioned the illnesses and stresses and stressors that you felt, that your company felt, that your employees have endured. And to ignore that would mean that whatever you put together just won't work. That's a biggie, and that's about futuring, which we'll come back to in a minute. Principles of training design is about the intersection between what you do with your human capital and your business goals, and how you formally train them. He shouted, but through knowledge management, and probably more importantly, through informal learning, where things are picked up and learned along the way. Think about the first job you had. I have a grandson who's got a job as a host in Applebee's, and he's in training right now, actually. Apparently, they're doing a very nice job of training him about things, but he's also telling me that, the other kids there and, other employees there tell him, pay attention to this. They didn't mention that in the training, but you need to pay attention to that. Those are the things that come along the way that are often overlooked and ignored or demeaned by the formal training, but nonetheless very important, which begs the question about what could you do to encourage informal learning? And you know that there are ways that you can do that, and you probably are doing some of those things now. We haven't gotten to, we've talked about mental models when we talked about Senge and the 5 disciplines. I'm going to extend that next week to the premise of culture. Culture is what we do, even though we don't know why we're doing it. Think about that. Things that people do within their families, within their churches and groups, within their school systems, within their businesses. Why do they do those things or not do those things? I'm not sure this is a great example, but I'm a big Yankee fan, and they were playing Oakland, although Oakland beat them yesterday in a stupid play. But you could see how the Oakland culture, that team's culture, was defeated or before they walked out on the field. They're playing the Yankees, playing really well, except for the last couple of weeks. And you could just see them. Their culture had a hidden belief that has to be examined to see whether they're ever going to have a winning culture rather than a losing one. And so we talked about this already. And there's a key word. The verb there is differentiation. That's a high-level word rather than a low-level one, where you would need to perform a needs assessment, which is one of the first things we're going to do pretty soon. How do you know what you know? What do you need to know in order to know what you need to do to know? How do you perform needs assessment? Lots of ways to think about that. So we're going over that big time. What does motivation really mean? Some of you said you've made business career decisions and life decisions to take courses like this in order to enhance your skills. So you're motivated to take this class, internally motivated. No one hit you over the head with a bat and said, go take the course. That would be external motivation. Now, companies, organizations typically use both kinds, sometimes more of the latter than the former, and they're the ones that usually suffer for that matter. And I see the prescriptions are spelled wrong. I'll fix that later. How would you deliver your formal training? How would you deliver your informal training? How would you apply it? More importantly, how would you evaluate it? Sometimes that gets overlooked. So those are some of the premises in that. And again, the book will get into these things in more detail as we move through it. And then we go to chapter 2. Look at the verbs. Draw the relationship. Recognize low level. Distinguish high level between centralized and decentralized development. Recognize a university approach. Recognize business embedded instruction design. Consider how to market a training program to stakeholders. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 courses in there. Not one class session here. There are 6 courses in there. It's a great complexity as far as all of these premises are concerned. But what we're doing now is taking some sandpaper and rubbing it across your skull so that you're more sensitive to what these issues may take into effect, take into consideration. The one point I will point out for a moment is distinguish between centralized or decentralized development. How is the training? Let's go with formal for a minute. How does the formal training take place in your organization? Centralized, that is to say, one place, or is it broken out and decentralized? I get the idea from some of you that it was centralized, but others said the lady with the 2,000 employees, the engineering firm, Komal, I think that was you. Sounds like you have to have a decentralized development for any numbers of reasons. Now, one issue to think about as an HR person and as you advise your boss is the power that one has over the other in terms of being effective and in terms of defeating the other's thrust. That has to be considered as well. Sometimes you take professors like bald guys with glasses and a beard, and you bring them in from universities, or you run your own university. A lot of corporations, big corporations, are running their own universities. They don't call it that, but that's what they are. Google does that. Microsoft does that. Amazon does that. I think Amazon does. I'm not sure about Amazon. Those are 2 that come to mind straight away because they're dissatisfied with the preparation that their prospective employees have and feel the need to more intensely devote this training to what they want to do with making this all come together. So that's the chapter 2 thrust. And again, I won't read all of this to you, but drawing the relationships. The key verb there is aligning optimal training within the culture of the business, getting those goals to all weave together and overlap and weave with the human and social capital that you have to come up with a synchronized plan. There's a lot of verbs there, aren't there? And that's about strategic thinking and futuring. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I point out the figure on 2.1, training and development, how you consider the issues and variables associated with that. And then to come back to the premise I emphasized before, can't be enough, is the world out there. People have become more aware of that the past year or 2. The world out there, supply chains. It's all about the world out there. Enough said. Okay, one size fits all. I'm not going to read these things. You can read them yourselves. But this is valuable summary, if anything else. Again, what do you know? What do you not know? What do you not know that you don't know? How do you find that out? And I go back again to the premise of culture and mental models. And my slide says stakeholders' openness to change. I would change the word openness. I'll do that when I have a moment. Capacity to change, the ability to change, the mindset to change, the mindset to talk to each other and engage with each other, to problem solve together. How well are they able to do that? And if they're not able to do that, then what would you do to train them if they don't have those muscles? Ignore them, or would you find another? Would you hit them over the head with a bat, or would you come up with a strategy that you haven't used before? I hope it's the last piece. Chapter 3 we'll save. Okay, we recognizing necessity for organizational analysis, which is to say, you can't go. I'm shouting at you, and you're not even there. You can't go forward to really make decisions until you have your arms around the culture. Okay, analyze the complexity of the group. Now you've begun to do that apparently in some other courses as well, but you've also have using the Senge learning disciplines template. You begin to realize, yeah, we're pretty good at this and not so good at that. And I would dare to say that if anyone, I don't remember anyone saying this, said that you have an A+ in all those areas. I doubt that's true. This isn't true. Enough said. Okay, so that would be this this PowerPoint, and the next PowerPoint is about futuring. And again, I remind you that I have put both of these PowerPoints into the document section of Blackboard for your review. I don't think you see that. Try it again. Yeah, you see it now. Okay. I'm obsessed with futuring. He smiled. I'm obsessed with the idea of deciding in all its forms. Think about all the decisions you make every day of your life, across your whole life. I don't know what the research says, but it's got to be in the millions. Turn my car left, turn my car right, stop at the red light, not stop at the red light. Ask him to marry me, run away. The levels of decision making are enormously complex, and the research about decision making is incredibly important and complex. I'm going to start with a quote, and here it is. I'm going to give you two quotes. I don't think they're on the slides. One is when it comes to, and these are not my quotes. Richardson said, when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. There are those who watch it happen. There are those who make it happen. And there are those who wonder what happened. I was talking to Kamal last week about our engineering firm. What would they do about, I think it was Kamal, about, maybe it was Christine, the other lady, beginning with a C. I'm sorry. What would they do if all cars became driverless? Would you need parking lots? How would you decide what to do with the equivalent of parking lots that equals the state of Delaware in its territory? We went back and forth a little bit about that. Would you watch it? Would you just let that go to weed, or would you do something about it? Wonder what happened, make it happen. What's wrong with me today? Wonder what happened, make it happen, and watch it happen. Enough said. Another quote, this I might have made up. I think I might have made it up. I don't remember anymore. I always talk about the 3 Ps of futuring, really 4. but I'll give you three for now. And I already mentioned them in the previous video, and that would be what's possible. Most anything is possible. Pigs could possibly fly someday. I can make an argument for that, actually. What's probable? I'm trying to remember what some of the companies that you folks work for, and I can't come up with an example straight away. But what's probable? Given what you know, what you don't know, well, not what you don't know, but what you know, what do you think will happen? I was talking to an engineer yesterday at a party. It was in Texas, and he was saying, they're talking about the drought, and they have no wells in Texas. And really what they do is they use surface water to feed their huge growing population. And so what they're doing is they're damming up, they're creating artificial reservoirs and collecting groundwater, collecting water, rainwater, I guess. I'm not sure where the water's coming from. You say they think it'll work for about 20 years. Oh, okay. So 20 years from now is 2042. I won't be here, I don't think, but most of you will be. I wouldn't go to Texas in 2043. How far out are they futuring as such? Because they think that's probably going to happen. So obviously the preference is that they wouldn't run out of water. So there's a gap between their probable future that they perceive and their preferable one. What do you do about that gap? You either let that happen, they ignore it, or do you do something about it? That's what futuring is about. Now, what I have here is just a quick chart. I mean, just to show you at the value of futuring, because there are skills of futuring and forecasting. You probably learned some of them with a different name for them. They're not like I created them out of thin air. There are skills, there are competency, was a little bit different than skills, and there is dispositions, which I think is probably the most powerful piece of that. How you view the future, how your company views the future. I have a book about this if you want to read it. Going across the top, we're going across the horizontal and the blue there. You notice I put systems disciplines there. Then I put some other ones we haven't talked about yet, although we will. One is design thinking, AKA creativity. All right. Another one is exactly what it sounds like. How well does the organization collaborate? And we used this phrase a few minutes ago. What is the cultural capacity of the organization to change? I think I mentioned my wife calls it Disney idiot savant. And Walt Disney he's long gone, as we all know, back before they even built Disney World. We were just talking about Disneyland. We said that Disney World, Disneyland would always be changing, would never stay the same. And any of you know what the latest ride's going to be, or the latest hotel, the latest changes in their practices, is they're constantly evolving their systems to meet the needs of things that they may have overlooked or that they foresee coming. So I don't want to read this all to you. I'm just going to read you the top level. So if futuring the skills, the competencies, and the dispositions of futuring exist, how does that affect systems? Clearly, systems thinking cross impacts everything. They recognize that and they work with it. A la how I just mentioned Disney. If futuring practices and dispositions are strong, they're going to be creative in their problem solving, and they're going to encourage transformation. The same kind of things you would like to see in your employee stakeholders. If you use futuring practices and dispositions, not only will the bosses know how to collaborate and lead, but everyone will be able to pitch into that and contribute to a collaborative learning model, which all the research points to as the way we all want to go. And lastly, if futuring exists from a strong sense, the organization's cultural ability to change will enable it to lead from what Otto Scharmer called the emerging future, like those reservoirs in Texas, and align it with their practices with their preferable one. in so many senses, you're responsible for this as HR. If not solely responsible, co-responsible with your leadership for them to recognize how the concepts and skills of futuring need to be consciously infused across the board in order for that organization to continue to thrive. Now, what's the opposite? What about an organization that doesn't practice futuring? I'm not going to read that to you because it's so negative, but you may want to take a look at that on your own in order to probably do your essay or your discussion question. I don't use the word predict. I use the word forecast. Forecast is a broader term. When you watch the news tonight to see whether it's going to rain tomorrow, so you can play golf or not play golf tomorrow, which is my question for the day. You'll get an answer like it's a 30% chance, it's a 90% chance, and you can tell, and because they leave themselves room to be wrong. You smile. When you look at your 403 or 401s, I should say, when you look at your 401 investment and you see that thing going down, as most of them are lately, all right, you need to know what the economic forecast seems to be in order for you to make decisions about where to take that to the next place. In order to really do a good job of forecasting, you or someone in your organization needs to run what I call a futuring training, I guess, for want of a better term. It's not the greatest term I can think of. And there's 5 phases to that. I'm just going to point them out to you. One is to get information, learn everything you need to know about the world out there, the world inside, how they mix and match, how they don't, what to suggest for what possible and probable futures as such. And then what you begin to learn is what we call if-then thinking. If I punch someone in the nose, their nose bleeds. Then they punch me back, then my nose bleeds. Then we both go to jail. That's if-thenning. Okay? If I put on a red shoe on my left foot and I put on a black shoe on my right foot, then people think I'm senile. Or we can't match color, or colorblind for that matter. Everyone does two-dimensional thinking all day long. It's superficial thinking most of the time, but it's important thinking because it leads to three-dimensional thinking, which is when you look at it from many layers. If I throw a rock in the middle of a puddle, there are ripples on the surface. It affects the lily pads, affects the frog, affects the insects flying around on top of the pond, all this, the beauty of the pond, perhaps. Believe it or not, there are also ripples beneath the pond, the surface of the pond. And those are the ones you need to pay attention to, because those are the ones that will hurt you up the road. So there's 3 types of forecasting there, and then there's a couple of others. I'm not gonna read all this to you now, but I'll show you how these work as we move through it. It's very specific about how to do some things. Also gives you some good websites. This is a 2-dimensional strategy. Really quickly, if the future is that businesses had not planned for the pandemic, what's an impact of that? What's another impact of that? Another and another. Well, what's the impact of the impact? What's another impact of the impact? What's the impact of the impact of the impact? People who think that far through, the chess players, I'm a terrible chess player, are the ones who can come up with a 2-dimensional set of skills to go with that. This is another way to do it. You can read that on your own for the moment, and I'll stop right there because I don't want to overdo this. But what I want you to do is recognize the value of futuring insofar as it intersects with the value of systems discipline analysis. By the way, there is a good argument to show that futuring is a subset of systems discipline. I don't argue that point. I'm just breaking it out to emphasize its value. And, this is me being kind of smug. I work in 2 worlds. I work in the business training world, and I work in school leadership world. And I can tell you flat out that school leadership is notoriously bad at futuring. They're really bad at it. My experience with business organizations is more positive, that they know they needed to do that in order to survive. But they're not great at it consistently. So you take the context that you have, somebody I remember works in civil service. How good at this is the civil service jobs? How good is the government at futuring? I like to say they're pretty good at it, but I'm not so sure. So you have two videos to look at. The introductory video of the 3 chapters. You have the assignments identified, and I explained my expectation for discussion questions. And so I'm going to be on tomorrow night. If anybody has a question about an assignment or about anything at all, or wants more explanation of futuring or anything else within those first couple of chapters, let's do it. And if you're not on around 6:15, 6:20, I'm going to have dinner. He smiled. Everybody take care. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend, and go Giants.